I keep the quilt folded on the passenger seat, the whole drive to Sullivan's Island. 52 squares of hand-stitched cotton, 9 months of work. Every square cut from fabric that meant something. A piece of my wedding dress, a square from my daughter's first Halloween costume, a strip of blue flannel from the shirt my husband wore the day we brought her home from the hospital. I made it for my grandchild, who isn't born yet. I made it with the kind of love that doesn't know how to be anything else. I'm parked in the circular driveway of the Caldwell estate, looking up at the white columns and the wrought iron and the live oaks draped in Spanish moss, and I'm asking myself a question I've been too afraid to ask for 3 years. Does my daughter actually want me here? 20 minutes ago, I walked through the wrong door. I'll tell you what I heard in a moment. But first, let me tell you who I am, because it matters. My name is Dorothy. I'm 63 years old. I taught 5th grade at Maplewood Elementary in North Charleston for 31 years. I retired 2 years ago, and I make quilts. Not as a hobby the way people say when they're being polite about something small. I sell them. I have a table at the Charleston Farmers Market every Saturday, and a little online shop that my neighbor's granddaughter helped me set up, and last year, I made almost $18,000 doing something I love. My husband Gerald died 11 years ago. Heart attack. A Tuesday in February. Nothing dramatic except that it was the end of everything I thought my life would be. We raised Melissa in a 3-bedroom house on Rosewood Drive. Good neighborhood, modest house. She had dance lessons and soccer cleats and a college fund, and a mother who packed her lunch every single day for 13 years. I know because I counted. Melissa met Preston Caldwell at a fundraiser gala in downtown Charleston. She called me that night, breathless, said she'd met someone extraordinary. She was 31. I was happy for her. I am still happy for her. Underneath everything, I want to remember that. The Caldwells are old Charleston money. Robert Caldwell Sr. built a hospitality and real estate empire over 40 years. His wife Eleanor chairs 3 charitable foundations and hasn't set foot in a grocery store since 1987. By my estimation, they were polite to me at the engagement dinner, polite the way you are to someone you're tolerating. Eleanor admired my bracelet, the one Gerald gave me for our 20th anniversary, and said it looked charming in a vintage sort of way. I thanked her. I smiled. I took the smaller seat at the table without being asked. I've been smiling and taking the smaller seat for 3 years. Today was supposed to be different. Today was Melissa's baby shower. The Caldwells called it a welcoming ceremony, which should have told me something. And I drove 40 minutes to Sullivan's Island, with my quilt and my hope and a peach cobbler I baked this morning. Because Melissa always said my peach cobbler was the best thing she'd ever tasted. I arrived 30 minutes early because I wanted to help set up. I wanted to feel useful. I wanted to feel like the grandmother of this baby, not a guest from a different world who'd been sent a formal invitation as a courtesy. The front door was locked. I walked around to the side entrance, the one the caterers use, because I'd been there twice before, and I knew the layout. The door was propped open. I could hear voices from the sunroom at the end of the hall. Melissa's voice and Eleanor's voice, and the voices of 2 women I'd later identify as Eleanor's friends from the Preservation Society. I stopped walking before I reached the doorway. Something in the tone made me stop. "We'll do it right after the cake," Melissa was saying. "Before the gifts. The slideshow?" Eleanor's voice, smooth and warm the way expensive things are. "Perfect timing. People will be relaxed. I've been collecting photos for weeks." Melissa laughed, a high, bright sound. "There's one of her craft room that is genuinely unbelievable. Every surface covered in fabric. It looks like a thrift store exploded." The women laughed. Not mean laughter, not yet. Just the laughter of people who share a world and are confirming the borders of it. "And the one at the farmer's market?" one of the other women asked, with the hand-lettered sign, "Dorothy's Quilts." The letters aren't even straight. More laughter. Preston thinks it's going to be the highlight of the afternoon. Something for everyone to bond over. I pressed my back against the hallway wall. My peach cobbler was starting to feel heavy. "Does she know about the presentation?" Eleanor asked. "God, no." Melissa's voice dropped slightly. She'd make it weird. She'd probably cry or get her feelings hurt, and then the whole afternoon would be about managing her. You know how she is. Sensitive? She means well, but she's just. She doesn't understand our world. She grew up in it a different way. A pause. I love her. I do. But I need my friends and Preston's family to see that I've grown into this life. That I belong here. And having her stand up and talk about teaching 5th grade and selling quilts at a farmer's market isn't going to help that. So we let the slideshow do the heavy lifting, Eleanor said. A little gentle humor. People will love her for being so authentic. Authentic. Melissa repeated the word. Like it was a gift she was accepting. Yes, exactly. I stood in that hallway for a long moment, long enough to hear them move on to discussing the centerpieces, long enough to understand that my daughter had spent 3 years building a life in which I was the funny story she told to explain where she came from, the charming detail, the proof that she'd come a long way. I walked back out the side door quietly. I sat in my car. I put the quilt on the passenger seat and I looked at it for a while. Then I looked up at the Caldwell estate, at the white columns and the manicured hedges and the architectural drawings framed in shadow boxes on either side of the front entrance. I'd noticed those frames when I arrived, but hadn't paid them attention. Now, sitting in my car with nothing left to lose, I looked at them properly. Well, large format architectural renderings. A building I recognized immediately. The old Merchants Bank building on Broad Street. 4 stories, 1,889, cast iron facade, one of the most debated properties on the Charleston Historic District Architectural Review Board's current docket. The project name printed at the bottom of the rendering read, Caldwell Heritage Hotel, Caldwell Heritage Group, Developer. I sat very still in my car. I've been a volunteer member of the Charleston Historic District Architectural Review Board for 11 years. I joined after Gerald died because I needed somewhere to put my energy, and I'd always loved old buildings. I review applications. I attend hearings. I cast votes on whether proposed changes to historic properties meet preservation standards. It is genuinely one of the most fulfilling things I do with my time. The Caldwells submitted their application for the Merchants Bank conversion 8 weeks ago. I had reviewed the initial paperwork myself. I knew the project. I knew the vote was scheduled for 2 weeks from today. I knew it was a close call. 4 board members leaning toward approval. 3, including me, with significant concerns about the proposed rooftop addition that would alter the building's historic silhouette. What I had not known, until this exact moment, sitting in this car, was that the developer was my daughter's husband's family. The Caldwells had never asked what I did with my time. It had never come up. Because in their world, a retired school teacher's volunteer work was not a thing that required attention. I drove home. I did not go inside for the welcoming ceremony. I did not deliver my quilt or my peach cobbler. My phone buzzed 4 times before I reached the bridge. I turned it face down and kept driving. When I got home, I made coffee, and I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Melissa with her homework, where we'd eaten 1,000 dinners, where she told me about Preston for the first time, and I pulled out my laptop and opened the board application files. I read through the Caldwell Heritage Hotel proposal from beginning to end. It was ambitious. A full conversion of the historic bank into a boutique 32-room hotel with a rooftop bar. The rooftop addition was the sticking point. According to their own architect's notes, the project's financial viability depended on that rooftop. Without it, the projected return dropped below the threshold their investors required. I also found something I hadn't flagged during my initial review because I hadn't been looking for it. A note in the supplemental materials indicating that Caldwell Heritage Group had 2 other pending permit applications with the city, both contingent on the Broad Street project proceeding first. If the Broad Street application was denied or significantly delayed, the entire pipeline stalled. My phone buzzed again. A text from Melissa. Mom, where are you? People are starting to arrive. I set my phone down. Another text 5 minutes later. Mom, this isn't funny. Please tell me you're on your way. And then, fine. I didn't respond to any of them. I sat with my coffee and my documents and the particular kind of clarity that comes when you stop being afraid of something. I want to be honest about what I felt that evening. People expect it to be anger. Clean, righteous, uncomplicated. But what I felt was grief. For the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during thunderstorms. For the teenager who made me a Mother's Day card every year until she was 18, always handmade, always with some small drawing of the two of us doing something we loved. For the young woman who called me crying from her first apartment in downtown Charleston saying she didn't know how to cook anything and could I come show her. I had driven 45 minutes each way 3 weekends in a row to cook with her in that tiny kitchen. She was my whole life for a very long time. And now I was the funny story she told at parties. My neighbor Carol knocked on the door around 8 that evening. She'd heard my car come in early and wanted to check on me. I told her the short version. She sat down without being asked and poured herself the rest of my coffee. You know what you have, she said. A vote on their board application. A vote on their board application. She nodded. What are you going to do with it? I don't know yet. Yes, you do. I'm going to vote the way I always vote, I said. Based on the merits of the application. Based on whether the project respects the historic integrity of the building. Carol looked at me over her coffee cup. And does it? I thought about the rooftop bar. About the way the rendering showed it sitting on top of 140 years of cast iron architecture. Like something dropped from a different century. About the 3 preservation architects on our board who had already submitted written objections to that exact element. No, I said. It doesn't. The next morning, Melissa called at 7:30. I let it ring. She called again at 7:45. I answered on the 3rd call. Mom. Her voice had that careful quality people use when they're trying to manage a situation. I need to understand what happened yesterday. I went home, I said. You left without telling anyone. Without a word. People were asking where you were. Preston's mother had to cover for you. What did she say? A brief pause. She said you weren't feeling well. That's kind of her. Mom. What is going on? Are you angry about something? Because if this is about not being on the decoration committee, we talked about that. Victoria handled all of that, and it wasn't personal. It was just, Melissa, I said. I went home because I heard you. Silence. I came in through the side entrance. I heard you and Eleanor talking about the slideshow, the photos of my craft room, the farmer's market sign with the crooked letters. More silence. Longer this time. Mom, I heard you say you needed people to see that you'd grown into your life. That having me talk about teaching and quilting wasn't going to help that. I kept my voice very steady. I'd practiced this part. I heard you use the word authentic like it meant harmless. That's not, she stopped. Started again. It was supposed to be funny. Affectionate. People do roasts for family members at events all the time. Was I asked? What? Was I asked if I wanted to be roasted at your baby shower? Was I given any say in how I was going to be presented to 150 people? Nothing. You told them I was simple, I said. You implied I wouldn't understand why I wasn't included in certain things. That managing me would make the afternoon complicated. Those were your words. I didn't. Her voice broke slightly. Mom, I was just trying to explain. The Caldwells have a certain way of doing things, and I was trying to prepare people so that what? So they wouldn't be surprised by me? So they'd know in advance that I was the rough edge you were still trying to sand down? The line was quiet for a long time. I don't know what you want me to say, she finally said. I don't know either, I told her honestly. I need some time to think. I'll call you later this week. I hung up, and I drove to the board offices downtown, and I pulled every document related to the Caldwell Heritage Hotel application, and I read it again, all of it, more carefully than I had the first time. The vote was in 12 days. The week between that phone call and the board vote was the strangest of my life. I went to my farmer's market table on Saturday and arranged my quilts and sold 2 of them to a young couple who were furnishing a nursery, and I thought about my grandchild, who would be here in 3 months, and I wondered what kind of grandmother I was going to be allowed to be. I took my morning walks. I worked on a new quilt, ocean blues and seafoam greens, something that calmed my hands when my thoughts wouldn't settle. I had dinner with Carol twice. Melissa texted on Monday, "Can we please talk?" I texted back, "I'll call you Thursday." On Tuesday, Preston called. His voice was careful and professional, the voice he used for business. "Dorothy, I wanted to reach out personally. Melissa told me what happened. I want you to know the slideshow was my mother's suggestion and I should have put a stop to it. I'm sorry we didn't handle that better." I noted the phrasing, that we hadn't handled it better. Not that it was wrong to plan it in the first place. "Thank you for calling, Preston," I said. A pause. "We really value your presence in our family. Melissa talks about you constantly. That's good to hear." Another pause. Longer. "I wanted to mention, I'm not sure if you're aware, but our company has an application pending before the Historic District Board. It's something we're very invested in." And there it was, 3 days before the vote, and he was calling to mention it. "I'm aware of the application," I said. "Oh," the careful voice became something more careful. "I didn't realize you followed the board proceedings." "I'm on the board, Preston." The silence that followed was the most complete silence I had experienced in 11 years of board service. He stopped. "You're on the Historic District Review Board. 11 years. Melissa never mentioned. No one ever asked." I let that sit. "Dorothy." His voice had changed entirely now. The professional pleasantness was gone. Underneath it was something raw, something afraid. "I want to make sure we're not mixing up personal matters and professional ones here. I've been on this board for 11 years, I said. "I have never voted on anything except the merits of the application in front of me." Of course. "I'll see you at the hearing Thursday," I said. I called Carol afterward and told her about the conversation. She laughed until she cried. I did not laugh, but I felt something I recognized from the very best days of teaching. The days when a child who'd been struggling finally understood something, a kind of clean, honest clarity about what was right and what it would cost. The morning of the vote, I wore the blue dress I'd bought for Gerald's retirement party 12 years ago. It still fit. I drove downtown in the early light when the streets were just starting to fill up, and I parked and I walked to the old City Hall building where the board met, and I sat in my usual chair, and I looked at the agenda and I waited. The Caldwells arrived with their architect and 2 attorneys, Robert Sr. in a charcoal suit, Eleanor beside him in pale cream. Preston stood near the back wall. When he saw me take my seat at the board table, something crossed his face that I will not describe because I don't take pleasure in it. The hearing was formal and procedural and took 90 minutes. The Caldwell's architect presented the project. Board members asked questions. Public comment was taken from 3 preservation groups, all opposing the rooftop addition. The Caldwell's attorney argued that the economic revitalization value outweighed the aesthetic concerns. It was a competent presentation. Their project was well designed except for the one element that compromised everything. When it came time for the vote, it went 4-3 in favor of approval. I was one of the 3. Eleanor Caldwell turned in her seat when the votes were announced. I met her eyes across the room. She held my gaze for a moment and then looked away. Preston was already on his phone. Melissa called me before I'd made it back to my car. I stood in the parking garage and answered, Preston told me. Her voice was shaking. "Mom, that project, do you understand what that project means to this family? We've had investors lined up for 2 years. The other applications are tied to this one. If it doesn't go through, the rooftop addition alters the historic silhouette of an 1,889 landmark." I said. "That's been the board's primary objection for 8 weeks. I voted consistent with the preservation standards I've upheld for 11 years. You could have abstained. On what grounds?" "I had no conflict of interest. I didn't know it was your family's project until the day of your shower. Melissa." I sat down on the concrete parking divider because my legs had decided they needed a moment. 3 days ago, Preston called me and mentioned the application in the same breath as telling me I was valued by your family. Did you tell him to do that? Nothing. Did you? He was trying to. Did you tell your husband to call me and mention the board application? I mentioned that you were on the board. I mentioned that the vote was Thursday. I didn't tell him to say anything specific, but you wanted me to understand the stakes. Her voice was very small now. I wanted you to understand that this matters to us. I understood that, I said. And I still voted my conscience. Do you understand what that means? A long quiet. It means you chose your principles over your family, she said. There was no heat in it, just exhaustion. It means I have principles, I said. Which is something you seem to have forgotten when you were planning that slideshow. I heard her breath catch. I'm not doing this right now, I told her. I'm going home. I'll call you this weekend. I drove home and I put on the kettle and I sat in my craft room, surrounded by fabric and thread and the quilt I'd made for my grandchild, and I allowed myself to feel everything I'd been holding back for a week. The hurt of hearing my own daughter describe me as a management problem. The grief of watching someone I raised become ashamed of the hands that raised her. The loneliness of driving home from that estate in the evening light knowing there was a baby coming who I might be kept at arm's length from. I cried until there wasn't anything left. Then I washed my face and I made tea, and I got back to work on the ocean quilt because I have never once in my life found a problem that got worse for having something beautiful made alongside it. Saturday morning, I got a text from Eleanor Caldwell. Mrs. Patterson, may I call you? I stared at that message for a long time. Eleanor had never initiated contact with me directly. Not once in 3 years. I replied, yes. She called within 2 minutes. Dorothy. She'd never used my first name before. It sounded unfamiliar in her mouth. I'm calling because I owe you a direct conversation. All right? The vote went against us. Preston is working with our architects on modifications to the rooftop design. We'll resubmit. She paused. I'm not calling about the vote. What are you calling about? A breath. I planned that shower presentation. It was my idea. I told Melissa it would be charming. I told her people would love it. That it would make her more relatable to some of our older friends who appreciate that kind of... I said the word authentic. She stopped. I heard you use that word back to Melissa on the phone. She told me. I did. I've spent 30 years curating how our family appears to the world. What we wear, where we're seen, what stories we tell, and how we tell them. It's so deeply embedded in how I move through life that I stopped noticing I was doing it. Another pause. What I did was wrong. I encouraged your daughter to display you like a curiosity. I helped her build a presentation that would make you a punchline so she would seem more polished by comparison. That's ugly. And it's my fault, as much as hers. I hadn't expected this call, and I certainly hadn't expected these words. I sat with them. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because Melissa came to me yesterday and she was devastated. Not about the vote. About you. About what you heard. She sat in my kitchen and she told me that you drove home alone and you didn't come in and she knows why and she can't stop thinking about it. Eleanor's voice shifted. She said her mother made her a quilt for this baby. 52 squares. 9 months of work. And it's still sitting in her car because she doesn't know if you'll ever want to give it to her now. My throat tightened. I hadn't known Melissa still had it. My daughter and I will work through what we need to work through, I said carefully. That's between us. I understand. I'm not calling to intervene. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I'm calling because I want you to know that I see what I did, and I see who you are. Not the version Melissa and I were packaging for my friends. The real version. A pause. Robert told me you've been on the Historic District Board for 11 years. I've been on the Preservation Society Board for 15, and I have never once thought to ask what our family members who aren't in business do with their time. I think I've been operating under the assumption that if it wasn't running a company or sitting on a board I recognized, it didn't count. That's a significant assumption, I said. It is. I'm working on it. She actually sounded like she meant that. After she hung up, I sat very still in my craft room for a long time. Melissa came to my house the following Sunday. She didn't call ahead, which surprised me. She just knocked on the door at 10 in the morning, holding 2 cups of coffee from the place down the street I like. And wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, no jewelry. Her hair in a braid. She looked like the girl who used to sit at my kitchen table doing homework. She looked young and sorry and scared. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, and neither of us said anything for a while. She looked around the room at the familiar things, the chipped coffee mug Gerald gave me for our last anniversary, the photo of the 2 of us at her college graduation, the stack of quilts on the chair by the window. "I've been sitting with this all week," she finally said, "trying to figure out when I became someone who would do that. Plan something like that. What did you come up with?" She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "It started small. When I first brought Preston home and you came to his family's dinner in the dress you'd made yourself, I remember thinking, please don't mention you made it. And then, feeling sick about thinking that." She looked down. "I kept choosing the comfortable thing, smoothing you out in my descriptions, leaving out details, translating you into a version they could easily understand. And the version they could easily understand was a joke." Her eyes filled up. "I told myself it was affectionate. I told myself you'd laugh. You told Eleanor I'd never stand up for myself. I know." It came out barely above a whisper. "I knew that, and I used it. I counted on it." She pressed her fingers to her mouth. "What does that say about me?" "It says you were wrong," I said. "It says you've been wrong for a while." "I have been." She looked at me. "Mom, I need you to know that the vote, I was upset in the moment. Preston was upset. But when I calmed down, I thought, she voted her conscience. She's been doing this job for 11 years, and nobody thought to ask. We just assumed you were." She stopped. "Background," I said. "Yes." The word cost her something. I'm so ashamed of that. I looked at my daughter, at this woman I had packed lunches for and stayed up nights worrying over, who had grown into someone who'd lost the thread back to herself, and I made a decision I'd been turning over all week. "I am not going to pretend none of this happened," I said. "I'm not going to smile and move on as though those words weren't said. I heard them and they were true, and they've been true for a long time. This thing you've been doing, I know, but you're having a baby, my grandchild. And I am not willing to disappear from that child's life, because you and I haven't figured out how to talk to each other honestly yet." I reached across the table. "So here is what I need from you. I need you to stop editing me. Stop translating me. Stop deciding in advance how I'll be perceived and managing me accordingly." I met her eyes. "I am a retired school teacher who makes quilts. I am a woman who loved her husband and misses him every day. I am on a board that just voted against your family's application, and I'd do it again. I am all of those things. And I am done being apologetic about any of them." Melissa nodded. Tears were running down her face. "If you want me in this baby's life, really in it, not in the background, not as the charming footnote from your humble origins, then that's what I need." "I want that," she said. "I want that, more than I know how to say. Then we start there." She reached into her bag and pulled out the quilt. Still wrapped in the tissue paper, I'd folded it in. Ivory ribbon intact. She set it on the table between us. "I've been carrying it with me all week," she said. "I couldn't leave it in the car." I looked at it. 52 squares. Gerald's shirt and her Halloween costume, and the strip of my wedding dress, and 30 years of loving someone as hard as you know how. "That's for the baby," I said. "Not for Eleanor's guest list. Not for anyone's presentation. For the baby." "I know." She pushed it gently across the table toward me. "Will you give it to her yourself? When she's here? You're having a girl?" Melissa smiled through the tears. "We found out yesterday. I wanted to tell you first." I held the quilt in my lap and I thought about Gerald. Who would have been the kind of grandfather who taught her to fish and read her stories in funny voices and slipped her $1 every time she visited? Who would have been so proud of this moment and so sad to miss it? I thought about what it means to hold a thing you made and know it was made with love even when the love was complicated, and the path back to it was long. I'll give it to her, I said. When she's here, the design modifications to the Caldwell Heritage Hotel came back to the board 6 weeks later. The architects had redesigned the rooftop addition significantly, lowering the profile, using materials that better complemented the cast iron facade, addressing every objection that had been raised in the first hearing. It was better work. Honest work. I voted yes. Preston shook my hand afterward in the hallway. Not the brief professional handshake I'd imagined from him. A real one. Thank you, he said. For voting no the first time. I looked at him. I mean it. The revision is better. The first design was lazy. We knew it wasn't right, but we thought we could push it through. He paused. We should have asked you to look at it before we submitted. We should have, he stopped. We didn't think to ask. No, I said. You didn't. We will from now on. My granddaughter arrived on a Thursday in April, 8 pounds 2 ounces, with Gerald's nose and Melissa's determined little frown. I was in the waiting room for 6 hours. When they brought her to me in the recovery room, Melissa watched me hold her daughter, and I watched Melissa watch me, and whatever wall had been between us for 3 years went thinner than it had ever been, not gone. I want to be honest about that. You don't undo years of quiet erosion in a single afternoon. We were still learning how to talk to each other without translating. There were still moments when I could feel Melissa editing herself, and I would say her name and she would stop and start over. There was still the long work of building something that could hold the weight of the truth between us. But I was in the room. I was in the photos on the wall. When Eleanor introduced me to her friends at the christening 6 weeks later, she said, "This is Dorothy, Melissa's mother. She's been on the Historic District Review Board for 12 years, and she makes the most extraordinary quilts." She said it like it was something worth saying. I think she was still learning, too. Maybe we all were. I still go to the farmer's market on Saturdays. My sign has new letters now, straighter ones, though Carol's granddaughter did them on her laptop, and I still think the old hand-lettered version had more character. I sold 4 quilts last week, including one to a woman from Ohio who said her grandmother had been a quilter and she'd never seen stitching like mine. I gave her my card. I told her I took custom orders. I keep the quilt I made for my granddaughter in the cedar chest in her nursery. Someday, when she's old enough to understand, Melissa is going to tell her that her grandmother made that quilt 1 square at a time. 9 months of work, from fabric that had stories in it. I know this because Melissa told me she planned to. She told me on a Tuesday evening when we were sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd made her do her homework, the same table where everything had started and now, slowly, was starting again. She said, "I want her to know who you are. Really know." I said, "Then introduce me right." She said, "I will, I promise." I'm learning how. That is not the ending people expect from a story like this. They expect resolution to be clean, a door closing, or one swinging wide open, full light. What I have is something more like a window I'm learning to keep unlatched. Some days it opens further than others. Some days the draft that comes through is cold, but it stays open. We keep it open. Gerald would say, "That's enough." He was always right about what was enough. I made a new quilt this spring. No particular occasion, just the making of it, which is its own reason. 64 squares this time. Every color I had in the house. I hung it on the wall of my craft room where my daughter can see it when she visits. And when she asked me what it was for, I told her the truth. "It's for me," I said. "I made it because I wanted to." She smiled. "A real one, no edges." "Yeah," she said. "I can see that."